following is a project of CHLY 101.7 FM's nonprofit newsroom in partnership with Dig FM and supported by the Local Journalism Initiative.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Heather Watson, your Local Journalism Initiative reporter for the Comox Valley. Humpback whales were once designated as an endangered species, threatened by commercial hunting from the late 1800s into the 60s. Their numbers have been resurging as more and more seasonal resident humpback whales are recorded returning to their herring buffet in the Salish Sea. These marine giants migrate thousands of kilometers every year from their tropical breeding grounds in the south to their northern feeding grounds right here along the BC coast. But despite the resurging numbers and the moratorium on whale hunting, North Pacific humpback whales are still at risk in our waters. On September 17th, a humpback whale collided with a BC Ferries vessel in Wright Sound, near Prince Rupert. The following day, a humpback was reportedly found dead in the same area. 1 month later, on October 17th, a Hello Ferries vessel collided with another humpback whale near Vancouver in English Bay. A humpback calf was spotted in the days before without injury and in the days following with a gash missing from its dorsal fin. A little less than a week later, on October 23rd, a whale-watching vessel collided with a humpback whale near Vancouver in Howe Sound. 2 days later, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, also known as DFO, confirmed a humpback mortality at Keats Island in Howe Sound, identifying the whale as Wisp, or BC Y1464, a female born in 2021. DFO Marine Mammal Rescue and the Canadian Coast Guard towed the whale to Sea Island for a necropsy. On November 8th, DFO confirmed another humpback mortality near Lasqueti Island. It is unreported at this time what the cause of death may have been. With noise disturbance, habitat degradation, and reports of entangled whales increasing as well, collisions with vessels are not the only threat to humpbacks. The apparent rise in these reports raises the question, why are we seeing this increase? Why are humpbacks seemingly at greater risk than other marine mammals? And why are we just hearing about it now? Two experts working in areas of research and conservation for humpback whales spoke with Midcoast Morning about their work and what is changing for humpback whales in the Salish Sea.
My name is Shuparski, and I'm the coordinator for Straightwatch Quadra Island, and that is under Cetus Research and Conservation Society. And the work that we do at Straightwatch is to monitor vessel behavior around cetaceans. So we look at distance, activity, and compliance with regulations and guidelines.
The term cetacean refers to a group of marine mammals including whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Shuparski says the Straightwatch teams work to both record data and directly intervene with boaters on the water who may not be aware of safe boating practices around cetaceans, as well as the rules and regulations.
So we interact with boaters every day. We sometimes have, up to 50 contacts a day, depending on where our vessel is stationed and how busy the area is that we're working in. In terms of boater awareness of the regulations, I would say it sits around 50%. It depends on who you're talking to. If it's a commercial vessel, of course, they're going to be more aware of the regulations. If it's a recreational vessel, it can be really hit or miss.
This lack of knowledge, Shuparski says, could be due to the fact there is no marine mammal regulation section included in the pleasure craft operator's license.
Marine Research and Education Society just put out this really great course with Transport Canada called the Whale Safe Boating Course. And that's a free online course that gives you this comprehensive breakdown of all the rules and regulations. But otherwise, it's not on the official licensing program.
Christie McMillan also spoke with Midcoast Morning. She's a Senior Habitat Assessment Biologist with the DFO, and 15 years ago co-founded MERS, the Marine Education and Research Society, which Shuparski mentioned.
My name is Christie McMillan, and I am a biologist with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I've been leading whale surveys in the southern Salish Sea since 2020, but I've also been studying humpback whales off the coast of BC since 2005.
Straightwatch coordinator Shuparski says the recent rise in humpback collision reports is raising concern in the research and conservation field.
Yeah, it's absolutely a rising concern. It is a number that we suspect is increasing, although it's difficult to say if reporting is increasing or if it's the number of incidents. I suspect it's both. Oftentimes, the incidents you hear about are the collisions with commercial operators, and oftentimes recreational vessels, when they collide with whales, which does happen quite frequently, they don't report it. And recreational vessels, because they're smaller, they have less of a potential fatal interaction with the whale. So you don't see the washed up corpses as much as you do with the big commercial vessels like a BC Ferries, for example. But it is something that is of growing concern, both for commercial operators, but also for smaller recreational boaters. Hitting a 40-ton animal in a small speedboat is really dangerous, and there have been cases in BC of people getting seriously injured, and internationally of actually deaths by human deaths from collisions with whales. So it's something we have to think about, both from a conservation standpoint, but also a navigational hazard standpoint as well.
DFO biologist McMillan shared some background information connecting to why we may be seeing increasing vessel collisions with humpback whales specifically.
So just as a bit of context, so as recently as even 2004, it was really rare to see humpback whales in the southern Salish Sea at all. It was uncommon to see them. There was a whole survey conducted in these waters, and they didn't see a single whale in the summer of 2020 or in the summer of 2004. But our surveys have indicated that humpback whales really have returned to the southern Salish Sea in high numbers. In that southern Salish Sea area alone, we estimate that there are 150 humpback whales here in summer and over 400 humpback whales here in fall. And so there's a couple of really interesting pieces that have come out of this. And one is that not only have humpback whales returned to these coastal waters in these high numbers, but that their highest abundance is here in the fall months, not the summer months. And so seeing these recent vessel strikes during fall may have come as a surprise to some people, but it actually really supports what we're seeing in terms of when these whales might be most vulnerable to vessel strikes in this area.
Shuparski elaborated further on humpback behavior and how that could be increasing strike risk.
Humpback whales are the most common large baleen whale we can find in the waters inside of Vancouver Island. They are most often being struck compared to a cetacean like a killer whale because they're larger, they move a little bit more slowly. There's a lot we don't know about how they can avoid collisions, how they sense their surroundings. And of course, they're also much more common, especially this time of year. People think maybe they're off migrating, but actually this time of year, October, November, they're really close to the city as they start to head out towards the breeding grounds. So they come into close proximity to human activity. And this time of year as well, the blubber stores are much higher than they are in the spring when they're first arriving. So that means they're spending a lot more time in the upper surface area of the water column, which puts them in a strike risk area more often compared to earlier in the year.
When it comes to the increase in collisions reported, Shuparski says this could also be a result of improved education leading to improved reporting, as well as more public reporting with media taking an interest in whale stories. She also says alongside the increase in humpback whales locally, both commercial and recreational vessel traffic has increased vastly in the past 10 years, and with more boats and more whales, a greater potential for negative interactions is inevitable. McMillan agrees that an increase in vessel traffic is a contributing factor.
Yeah, for sure. And all different types of vessel traffic too. So, of course, with, increases to ports and pipelines and things like that, there's increasing large shipping traffic. There are more ferries and more ferry runs. There are people who have bought recreational boats since COVID and have been using those. There's, there is a lot of increasing vessel traffic in this area, and likely more increases too, especially with the large ships as additional projects are improved. So again, it's just an incredibly important reminder that humpback whales are back, and that, with this increasing vessel traffic, we need to have that awareness of the whales being in this area and what we might be able to do to reduce the number of these strikes, and also how likely the strikes are to injure and kill whales. Of course, whether or not a whale is going to get hit by a boat is going to depend on lots of things. Where's the whale? Where's the boat? What is the whale's behavior? But also the bigger and faster vessels are more likely to lead to a lethal strike or a more severe injury for humpback whales.
Another reason we could see increasing reports of strikes, McMillan says, could be due to increased reporting with a relatively recent requirement to report.
So on the one hand, the fact that humpback whales have returned to these coastal areas where there is a lot of vessel traffic, there's ferries, there's shipping traffic, there's whale watching boats, there's so many boats out there. So the fact that there are more humpback whales using these areas again now is, it would be surprising potentially that the number of vessel strikes would increase because of this. But it's a little more complicated than that. And one reason is that it's now a legal requirement to report any contact between a vessel and a whale. And that's only been true for the last, I guess since 2018. So it's been a few years now, but it is legally required to report when it happens. But also, a lot of times we don't know when a vessel strike has occurred. So it might seem crazy to think of when you're thinking of a smaller boat, but if you're thinking of bigger ships, cruise ships, big cargo ships, things like that, a vessel might not even know that it's hit a whale when it has. They might not know about the need to report a vessel strike. And one thing that has happened lately is that vessel strikes have been reported or the whales have been found washed up dead after the strike. But a lot of times dead whales will just sink to the bottom of the ocean and we'll have no idea what happened to them, whether it was a vessel strike, whether it was something else, or even that those whales have died. And so it's a really hard thing to try to come up with an estimate of how often these vessel strikes happen. And the ones that we hear about really are the absolute minimum of what's going on. So it is a bit complicated in terms of is this increase reflecting that more strikes are happening in the area, which in part probably because of that overlap, but also that we may be only seeing part of the picture when it comes to how many humpback whales are being struck by boats.
You've been listening to experts Emma Shuparski and Christie McMillan talk about the reasons for the seeming rise in humpback whale collisions this fall.
Support Midcoast Morning and nonprofit journalism on the Salish Sea by sharing this program with your friends and family. Every listener helps us on our way to sustaining local journalism.
On this episode of Midcoast Morning, Emma Shuparski and Christie McMillan have been sharing why we may be seeing so many humpback whale collisions in local waters this fall. Now that we have a better understanding of the causes, it's time to dive into how the issue of humpback safety can be improved in the Salish Sea. One factor that could point to potential solutions or improvements in this rising concern is the limited knowledge surrounding humpback behavior compared to other marine mammals like killer whales. McMillan's research seeks to fill some of these gaps.
So we've been working on whale surveys in the southern Salish Sea, so sort of from Vancouver out to the southwestern part of Vancouver Island. And these surveys have really been focused on better understanding the numbers of humpback whales that are in these waters and how they're using this area year-round. So where there might be sort of humpback whale hotspots and how these might change throughout the year. And a lot of the impetus for this work was to better understand vessel strike risk to humpback whales specifically, so to better predict where these strikes might be most likely to happen and when.
Her current research has potential to improve local regulations to make the water safer for humpback whales.
Right now, we're working on this vessel strike risk model. So we're looking at, how we can incorporate the data from our surveys with different types of vessel traffic information. And also we've been looking at dive behavior of humpback whales. So using little suction cup tags that we stick to humpbacks, we can look at, are they spending more time at the surface in day versus night or in different parts of this area? So we can use that to inform vessel strike risk as well. And so as part of this, we're working to have some science advice based on this research by hopefully next spring. And as part of those discussions, we are talking to, or we're including folks from Transport Canada and other organizations so that we're all working with the same information, and hopefully that will lead to some safer waters for humpback whales.
Shuparski says awareness of the current regulations is also critical and hopes to see a marine mammal safety section included in the pleasure craft operator license in the future. She also sees room for improvement within the existing regulations.
I think there's certainly always going to be vessel strikes that are unavoidable. Humpback whales, in addition to be these large, slow-moving animals, they also surface unexpectedly. They can be down under the water for 20 minutes at a time and all of a sudden pop up in front of a fast-moving boat. And that is just an accident. And aside from the reaction time of the captain, there's not a lot you can do. But I do think there's definitely room for improvement in the regulations that we have in Canada, such as increasing the distance. Right now, you can be quite close to a humpback whale, up to 100 meters, while it's 400 meters for killer whales. So I think we need to increase the distance. In addition, I think it's really important that we have speed restrictions. Right now in Canada, there is no legal speed restriction on how fast you can go next to a whale. And speed is the biggest indicator for physical and acoustic footprint. And by physical footprint, I mean a vessel strike. An acoustic footprint, I just mean the noise coming off your engine and causing a disturbance that way, which is also really important. So speed restrictions exist elsewhere in the world. Washington State has a speed restriction around 7 resident killer whales. And I think that is an area that would be really critical to consider when we update our marine mammal regulations.
Another hazard humpbacks face with rising reports surfacing is entanglement. Shuparski says a lot of instances involve recreational crab and prawn gear and would like to see stricter rules regarding when these traps can be placed. She says it should not coincide with when we have the highest density of humpbacks in our waters. When it comes to the restrictions in place to decrease risks of whale strikes, McMillan says some restrictions may not be sufficient for humpback whales specifically.
So there have been restrictions in place, slowdown zones, for example, in the Salish Sea, both mandatory ones, so smaller vessels need to slow down in places like Swifter Bank, so off sort of the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. There are areas where vessels have to maintain speeds of under 10 knots, so slowing down. There have also been voluntary slowdowns in the shipping lanes and the approaches to Vancouver. That large ships in the shipping lanes have largely been agreeing to do. So these voluntary slowdowns too. But one thing I'll note is that a lot of the focus in terms of the areas where these slowdowns should happen have been focused on protecting southern resident killer whales. So another population of whales in these waters facing serious threats from human activity, but a lot of those measures have been put in place specifically to protect southern resident killer whales. So some of what we're looking at right now, and some of the work I'm leading right at this point in time, is do those measures also protect humpback whales sufficiently, and if not, sort of where might those gaps be in terms of where maybe vessels need to have additional slowdown zones or things like that to ensure that it's not just protecting killer whales, but humpback whales as well.
While changes to regulations could reduce risks for humpbacks, another major step to improvement is public education. As McMillan says, if you have regulations in place and people don't know about them, they're not going to be very helpful.
There have been organizations and folks who have been working to sort of close that gap in terms of educating boaters about marine mammal regulations and about also just guidance, things like how to know if there's humpback whales in the area, likely based on where they're most often seen or whether there are birds in the area that might indicate food and things like that. So there are guidelines like the Be Whale Wise guidelines and the See a Blow, Go Slow guidance as well that have really, and folks that have been really working to educate the public about this. And so I think it's great to see that even if it takes a little bit longer to put things into regulations or courses or things like that, that we have NGOs and educators out there who are making sure that boaters are aware of the return of humpbacks in these areas and the measures in place to protect them.
With all the risks human traffic creates for humpback whales, it poses the question of whether we can safely cohabitate with these marine megafauna. Both experts weighed in. This is DFO biologist Christie McMillan.
Yeah, this is super important thought, and I think something we all think about a lot, to be honest, because, the last time that there were large numbers of humpback whales in this area, in the Salish Sea, was in the early 1900s. And after that, they were killed by whalers, and it took a long time for them to start, increasing in numbers in this area again. And obviously, the Salish Sea has changed a lot in that over 100-year period of time. So much more vessel traffic, so many more humans living in this area. So, of course, it's a very different place that the humpback whales are returning to. And, which presents challenges for the people and the whales, obviously. But I certainly think that we're not doing everything we can yet to reduce the chance of vessel strikes and other threats like entanglement. I've already mentioned things like slow down areas and educating boaters about how to operate safely in these waters. And I think, there are still lots we can do in terms of getting those messages out and learning more about the whales and the overlap with vessels and things like that. And as we mentioned before, whether a vessel strike happens and whether it's likely to lead to the death of the whale can depend on lots of things. It can depend on where those vessels are traveling, but also how fast they're traveling, when that is, what the whales are doing at that time. And so there are ways to, we likely won't ever see a world where no humpback whales will ever get hit by a vessel, but we may be able to decrease how often it's happening and the severity of those. So I have to believe that we live in a time that we can coexist with humpbacks in these areas, and I think there's still a lot more we can do to hopefully make that happen.
Straightwatch coordinator Emma Shuparski had a similar perspective to the question of safely sharing our local waters.
Absolutely, and it's a tricky question because in the past decade or so, humpbacks have made this big return to our area. The population as a whole has gone up and down, but in our area, we've seen this big influx of new individuals. And, people who've been on the coast their whole lives didn't grow up seeing them. I didn't grow up seeing them. So we're now learning just in the past 10 years how to coexist with this megafauna. And I think the question of how to do it is one that's going to be dynamic. And I don't think that there's one right answer or one silver bullet solution. But I think a start is just reasonable rules and restrictions, getting education out to the public and out to the people that are on the water, and reporting as well, whether it's sightings to NGOs like Oceanwise, their whale report sightings, or DFO if there's an accidental collision or entanglement. I think just having more education and more awareness to what these animals need to survive in this area is going to be the key moving forward.
Shuparski shares some steps residents can take to improve humpback safety in our local waters.
I'd say the biggest thing, if you get out on the water, whether it's a kayak or a paddleboard or a motorboat, take the whale safe boating course and educate yourself on the best practices. Another thing is just to look into your local NGO that researches whales. There's many, many different organizations up and down the coast, and support them however you can, coming out to outreach events, etc., as well as reporting your sightings. Oceanwise is a really great sightings network called the Whale Report app, and that app not only goes into a citizen science project, but it actually alerts in real time any large shipping vessels, ferries, container ships, that there's whales in the area. So those captains can then take avoidance measures to hopefully mitigate a collision.
McMillan says the most important thing anyone can do is keep an eye out and report incidents quickly. If you see a whale in distress, a vessel strike, an entanglement, or a dead whale washed up on a beach, call the DFO Observe, Record, Report line immediately at 1-800-465-4336. The more quickly the response team is alerted, the better chance the whale has of preventing further injury and surviving. While the question of the increasing humpback strikes in local waters remains nuanced, it is clear that improvements to these human-driven hazards can be made through research, regulation, and education. To learn more about humpback whales, Straightwatch, and the Cetus Research and Conservation Society, visit cetussociety.org. That is CETUS. Christie McMillan's marine mammal science research can be found on researchgate.net. That's our show for the day. Thank you for listening. I'm Heather Watson, guest host and producer for Midcoast Morning. Joe Pugh is our regular host and producer, Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. This episode of Midcoast Morning was produced in partnership with Dig FM in the Comox Valley and supported by the Community Radio Fund of Canada through the Local Journalism Initiative. This episode was produced on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. You You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you would like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca.
Enjoy Midcoast Morning and want to support local journalism? Give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you prefer.
This program gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.